some of that, most of it was with respect to guilt and value-based conflict was from Moore. A lot of that discussion with respect to should, ought, normative terms is something that I've introduced. But I think that it would support Moore's claim, and definitely I think that people interested in mediation and students should have an understanding of how we identify value-based conflicts, and the way that we identify one of the easiest way to identify these value-based conflicts is by recognizing what appeal is being made, and that appeal is usually couched within terms which are normative terms. Okay. And I know I'm going through rather quickly through this information, but there's a lot that can be covered, a lot that can be said. The next thing that is important to recognize that Moore discusses in the chapter are variables in reframing, framing and reframing issues. So it's important that in attempting to reframe a situation, right, and I'm not going to go into extensive detail on exactly the different processes of reframing issues are. I'll discuss a few of them. We have to make sure, one, so that in reframing, the first thing that we should do as mediators is we should make sure that we arrive at a mutually acceptable definition, right? So that the terms be mutually acceptable, right? So that in reframing, we want to make sure that when we reframe it, that it's mutually acceptable. We want to get an endorsement, an affirmation from the party that what we've said has successfully reframed. Now, of course, they don't know. The party doesn't know that what we're doing is reframing what they've said. But as we'll see later, as one example is detoxification, a party might say, you know, she's very persistent, and it drives me crazy. And obviously that language is loaded. Obviously that language can be interpreted by the other party as being hostile. And we don't want to create an environment in which our parties don't feel comfortable storytelling. And if the party's being interrupted, that's going to affect the mediation process. So what a skilled mediator would do is reframe that language, detoxify that language. And what we would do is take out, the implication that the party is inept, right? So you could successfully reframe it by saying, okay, let's say the party's name is Bob. Okay, Bob, what I'm understanding is that you're a little uncomfortable with the way that this other person is handling the situation. Is that correct? And that question of, is that correct, waiting for a response, is going to arrive at some type of mutual acceptability. Parties are going to then realize that, look, I am agreeing with the mediator, and thereby indirectly agreeing to this process of mediation. I'm agreeing that what you said is correct. And usually what I found in my own mediations is that the parties, not all the time, will scale back on their toxic language. But we'll get to that in a second. The second thing that we want to do in the process of reframing is we want to have successful problem solving. Successful problem solving. The reason why I didn't erase party A, party B in mediation is that this is really at the core of what mediation is. We have a party, and party A has this as his or her general interest. And then we have party B, remember when we were saying what your interests are, and we'll have party B that has this as his or her general interest. And I'm saying X and you're saying Y. And you can see how there'd be a disagreement between this. What the mediator wants to do is that the mediator wants to successfully be able to problem solve by allowing the parties to bridge a gap between their stories, right? They can create a narrative that bridges a gap between their stories, right? It is the responsibility of the parties to do this, right? It has to be determined by the parties. This gap, this determination, this shared narrative. We have a separate narrative here. This narrative is narrative X, right? This is narrative Y. This is narrative X, this is narrative Y, and what we're doing here is that this thing that is determined by the parties specifically is a shared narrative, right? They have to share a narrative. In order to maintain self-determination, which is one of the fundamental aspects of mediation, the mediator cannot propose what this bridge is. The mediator cannot, should not, making an appeal, propose what this bridge is. All that the mediator can do is facilitate either party to arrive at some type of consensus. That, in a sense, is what successful problem solving will lead to. It would lead to the old narrative, two old narratives, X and Y, and this new narrative, this new shared problem. Once that has been bridged, then the parties can easily identify how they can, usually identify how they can arrive at some resolve. Without a facilitator, without a mediator, without a negotiator, it becomes very difficult for the parties to see beyond their own interests, beyond their own concerns. So I think Moore's call to the importance of problem solving in his text is extremely important. Okay. Also, in this section of Moore's analysis, Moore goes through and he discusses some of the technical concepts and types of, we'll put types of frames. Some of the types of frames and reframes, right? I can have, as a party, a toxic frame. My frame can be toxic, right? It can have a very toxic frame. What I'm saying, I'm being satirical, I'm being hostile. I might say, she's so stupid. You know, I always have a problem with her because she's just lazy. Well, that's actually toxic language. You don't want that as a mediator to be, or to set precedence in your mediation, because what that allows is one of the parties to feel that you might be siding with another party, right? Wow, he's allowing this person to call me ignorant. He's allowing this person to call me lazy. What you want to do is you want to reframe that toxic language, and the process of reframing that toxic language is what's known as detoxification. And for example, I might say one party in family mediation might say about the other spouse, Bob doesn't love his kids. He's very lazy. He's self-absorbed, right? The way that I might reframe that, given other context clues, I might say, so Mary, what I'm understanding is that you would wish for Bob to participate more in raising the children. See, the same idea is there. She feels as though Bob has been inadequate in his contributions to the family, but what I've done is I've taken out that toxic language and I've reframed it in such a way that I'll be able to get a mutually acceptable agreement between the party that, yes, that's what I said, without maintaining the detoxification, without maintaining the toxic language. So I think that's an important point as well.